let's get this underway, folks. Thank you all so much for being here today. Some of you may know me. My name is Joe Amditis. I'm Assistant Director of Products and Events at the Center for Cooperative Media. We host these press briefings monthly as an opportunity to give some of the small local and community and ethnic media partners access to policymakers, decision makers, and all kinds of interesting and powerful New Jersey residents and officials. So today I'm happy to introduce, we are joined by the Office of State Comptroller, its acting State Comptroller, Kevin Walsh. Kevin Walsh leads the OSC and its investigatory oversight of more than 2,000 public entities in the state, including state agencies, local governments, law enforcement agencies, and school boards. He's a former civil rights attorney who led the Fair Share Housing Center, and he's focused on promoting efficiency, transparency, and accountability in government. The way this is going to work today, I'm going to bring Kevin up on screen here for us. He's going to give a presentation. He's got a few slides, and then we will leave ample time at the end for questions and answers from you all. This is being recorded, and you will get a copy of the recording as well as an auto-generated transcript after this event is concluded and the materials are done processing. And I'll also give any contact information that's publicly available for Kevin, Mr. Walsh's office, so that you can follow up with questions if necessary. So, Mr. Walsh, you are on screen now. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. You're welcome to take it away.
Great. Appreciate the introduction, Joe, and appreciate the center having me today, and really appreciate the chance to see some of you who I've spoken to before, to meet others of you, and to talk to reporters who are engaged at the local level. So much of what we do here involves municipalities and school districts. We oversee more than 2,000 entities within government, and I'm guessing among you, you cover a fairly substantial number of those, and I think it's really important to reach New Jerseyans in ways that that are relevant to them at the local level whenever we can. And I'm going to talk about a few reports today that have done just that in an effort at transparency in New Jersey, and then welcome the chance at the end for dialogue, for questions, and for folks to share where they think my office should be focused if you're interested in having that conversation. So let me share my screen and get started. Is that looking good? Can you see it?
Looks great. Looks great. Hit it.
So I will. The Office of the State Comptroller is New Jersey's watchdog. I think there's a news outlet that also says that, but we had it first, I think. I'm a cabinet member, sit on Governor Murphy's cabinet, was appointed in January of 2020, about 6 weeks before we understood what COVID was. And that has, as I'll touch on, informed some of the work that we do here. I am unconfirmed, and that means that I am the acting state comptroller and have been for 4 years. That is because my local senators won't clear me for a judiciary hearing, but I'm doing the job just the same as if I was cleared the Senate judicial process in the Senate, and doing it independently. Going to talk today about 3 investigations, areas of investigations that we focused on, and then, as mentioned, welcome your thoughts and questions. The state comptroller has been around since 2007. It consists of really 3 different statutes, and not sure if there's any lawyers on the phone in the meeting, but really welcome you to dig into our statutes, because it informs a lot of what we do and the powers that we have, shows how we're independent, and shows really the areas in which the legislature and through executive order, the political branches have decided that oversight is especially important. So we look out for fraud, waste, and abuse. We conduct audits. We have special obligations with Medicaid, which is just an enormous part of the state's budget and very important to the residents of New Jersey, but also an area where there's a high risk of fraud and abuse, and that is an area we focus a lot of resources in order to prevent that. A lot of the work we do is confidential, and yet at the same time, our goal is to provide transparency when appropriate. And so when we find that something has gone wrong, as you can see from from our reports that are online, and as I will touch on today, our job is to issue a public report, and we do that work independently, and the report is not seen outside of this office or the targets of investigations or the auditees by anyone else in government until shortly before its release. The core of the office consists of 4 divisions. Our audit division, which conducts audits, and you may be familiar with this office's work on the Economic Development Authority. We came out with, prior to me starting, the office came out in 2019 with an important report. I issued another one in 2022 that followed up on that, and in a very important area of tax credits and whether there are problems with that. And the office found both times that there were pretty substantial issues. The investigations division does what you'd think, focused on fraud, waste, and abuse. We have subpoena power. We conduct investigations of state and local government entities. The procurement division focuses on state contracts and really high value contracts over $12.5 million. Municipalities and sewer districts and school districts and state agencies have to give them to us to review, and we have a team of lawyers here that looks at them. And so if you're out and about at council meetings or and somebody is talking about a $20 million purchase, a good question is whether that contract was sent to the Office of the State Comptroller to review and to really make sure that there's competition, avoid favoritism. The office exists as a circuit breaker to keep political entities from making decisions based on politics instead of what's best for taxpayers, what's fair competition, really guarding against favoritism and nepotism, which historically have sometimes creeped their way into how taxpayer funds are spent. I've created 3 other areas where the office focuses. The COVID Oversight Project was created with an executive order by the governor, Executive Order 166. Once we saw that there were tens of billions of dollars coming into the state to respond to the COVID emergency. I've also created a police accountability project, which has issued 2 of the reports I'm going to discuss today, including, I think, one of our most recent reports involving a police training gone awry in Atlantic City from 2021. And then we've also conducted surveys where we reach out to a fair number of municipalities or school districts. And I'm going to talk about one survey we did today involving abuses of 2007 and 2010 laws requiring sick leave. You often hear about boat checks, and there are supposed to be limits on that, and the laws generally seem to be more ignored and disregarded than complied with. And I'll touch on that a little bit. The report we issued in May 2023 is where I'll start. We issued a report that found, let me start by saying I created the Police Accountability Project because the issue of reform in the area of policing, it's easy to claim that we're doing it. It's easy to issue policies. It's easy to issue press releases. What's sometimes hard is making sure that those policies, despite best intentions, actually gain some traction and result in actual reform. We issued this report in May 2023, finding that most municipal police departments that we looked at had not complied with a requirement that's important for residents to feel like they have the ability to hold police accountable. We looked at 100 randomly selected municipalities and found that 80 of them didn't meet the basic requirements to make a standardized form available, including in 11 languages online. 31 of the 100 departments didn't have any form at all that's available. And what was problematic about this is that this is the sort of thing that should be easy to comply with. And yet there was fairly widespread problems that we flagged. And the good news was that municipal police departments were able to quickly comply. The bad news was that it takes oversight like that for them to comply. And so we made recommendations to ensure that that process is followed going forward. This is the list of the 95 of 100 when you gather up the different ways in which they were in violation. And this report is on our website. And it worked a few minutes ago, but that link is now somehow not working. So you can check out on our website. That report has the full list of the 95 of 100 towns that are not in compliance. There were 5 that we found to be in compliance: Hoboken, Neptune City, Oceanport, Monroe Township, and Spring Lake. And then the full list of 95 you can check out on our website. Second report that I'd like to just touch on is a report that we issued about a month ago, reporting on a police training 6-day conference in Atlantic City in 2021, in which, and we made the videos available, segments of them, just to show how problematic it was. We found that more than 100 discriminatory and harassing comments by active New Jersey police officers were made on the stage. Some instructors, including police officers from New Jersey, made comments about advocating for stopping motorists for no reasons and illegally prolonging stops. Many of the instructors promoted a warrior mentality, which seemed to promote a level of vigilance and a dehumanization of the residents of New Jersey that is inconsistent with Attorney General requirements. And what the report did is overall find really wildly inappropriate, offensive, discriminatory, and harassing, and in some cases illegal recommendations from the speakers. We've found overall that there's a lack of regulation in the area of police training. Municipalities and state agencies need that. They need their officers to be trained, but there is absolutely no regulation. And so a private police training company can put out an advertisement. It can hire people to come in. It can charge hundreds of dollars for police officers to attend. In this instance, there were 1,000 police officers there, about 240 of them from New Jersey. And it can teach whatever it wants with no regulation, and taxpayers pay for this. It's on its face troubling, but what makes it even more troubling is that it ran afoul of efforts at police reform that were instituted in New Jersey and nationally. And we've called on the legislature and the Attorney General to address this really fundamental problem that allows police officers to be trained in ways that are inconsistent with the law and are offensive. These are the municipalities and the state agencies where we have confirmed that that they had officers who attended the training. There were a total of 240, and those officers came from, among others, these police forces. You notice that there are 2 state agencies there, 1 interstate agency, 3 sheriff's officers, and then municipalities as well. These are the sorts of places that are, if you're interested in following up, they're in these or in other places, because this is the list of entities that had somebody at the training in 2021. If you're interested in knowing about other municipalities, the company is called Street Cop, and those are, especially if the municipality paid for it, they would presumably have documents that are available to share. And one of the reasons we put the name of the municipalities is because we want people to understand this as close to home as they can, and to understand where their taxpayer dollars have been spent. A report I issued in July 2022 is another important one based on a survey that we put out and about, as I mentioned in introducing this, about municipalities and whether they comply with 2007 and a 2010 law that prohibit public employees in different ways, but in broad strokes, prohibit public employees from receiving more than $15,000 when they retire from a governmental entity. What you've probably seen in the press and what we certainly saw as we looked through and conducted the survey is that many public employees, some of whom can still do so lawfully, have received what's colloquially known as boat checks, sometimes in the hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars. This isn't just a recent problem. It's been going on for many years. And in 2000, between 2000 and 2007, multiple entities within government studied this. There was an investigatory report on it. The legislature thought about it and had a joint session one summer led by now Senate President Scutari. And at the time, Governor Cody formed a task force also to look at this. So it was thoroughly studied. And in 2007 and again in 2010, laws were passed that prohibited this. We took a look for the first time by anybody in government, really in depth to evaluate whether the promises made to taxpayers in those laws in 2007 and 2010, whether those promises were kept. And what we found overwhelmingly was that was not the case. 95% of the municipalities that we looked at a total of 60, were not in compliance fully with the 2007 and 2010 laws. And that's really a problem that is not just today's problem. It is a problem because police officers, public works employees, and others who are receiving illegal payments annually or who are accruing this time, if they don't use their sick leave, they are gaining the right at retirement. And so today's $500,000 and $600,000 payments in 20 or 30 years, if municipalities don't figure this out and comply with the law, could grow much larger. And it plays out in a way that's fairly sinister from a taxpayer's standpoint, because somebody who starts at a low pay, maybe making $60,000 or $70,000 as a first-year public employee, the way it often plays out is that they're paid out at their salary when they're done. And so if there is a junior police officer who 20 or 30 years later becomes police chief, making hundreds of thousands of dollars, the value of the sick day from 20 or 30 years ago becomes significantly greater. And that's how you see, among other ways, you see these payments that the law is supposed to stop. And we've, from what we can tell, the municipalities we found out of compliance have overwhelmingly come into compliance as a result of our efforts. But they still have work to do. And this is probably a problem in hundreds of other municipalities and sewer districts and water districts. And it's really a place that's appropriate certainly for public officials and executive people in, administrators and business administrators and CFOs. But it's also really appropriate, I think, for residents and the media to look into, because this is a major widespread source of waste and abuse, and maybe fraud, as it happens intentionally, no doubt, in some areas, knowing that it's illegal, the payments are still made. Final area that I'm going to touch on is a series of reports we issued, with the most recent one being in March 2023. And if you look at those, you can see that, and you can see it here, it's small print, but you can see here that we've identified this is the March 2023 report. We've identified the areas that there are, where there are nursing homes that have consistently, as indicated by the ones here, over a period of years, some of them over a period of nearly a decade, have received the lowest possible scores, which means that they are providing care that is at the lowest quality and often results in fines and immediate jeopardy to people, which a finding of immediate jeopardy is something that could result in serious bodily injury or death. And so places that have ones are much more likely to have those findings leveled against them. And what we found is that the state is spending over $100 million annually on many of the nursing homes that are the worst. We identified here 15 of them that are among the worst in the state, and the state has not had a system in place to say, if you continue to be among the worst, you will be kicked out of the Medicaid program. We're overwhelmingly funding these, probably 80, 90% and above in many instances, with state Medicaid dollars. And as our state policy has not insisted on improvements in these areas. Most recently, and this stands alone somewhat, was not part of this report, but my office issued a notice to the owners of the Limecrest facility, which is in Sussex County, and also owns the Woodland facility, which closed down, advising them that we were going to suspend them from the Medicaid program, meaning they would not be able to receive any more Medicaid funding in March 2024, 100 days from the notice. That's received some coverage. Stay tuned. Overall, what we've called for in these reports is a state policy that assures that being a one-star, the lowest possible nursing home, is a stopping off point to a better level of care. It should be a temporary status, not a way of doing business. And that's what we've called for in this report. So far, the state policy has not adjusted to that. Hopefully that changes. Part of what you see, part of what we've tried to do as a way to reach out to the media and to New Jersey residents is to share over the past year the places where our reports have touched. And you can scan the QR code there or take a look at our website. It was recently posted. This is a map that shows the places that are subject of some of those reports that I've touched on, involving policing, involving sick leave. Many of these involve Medicaid and nursing homes, and it'll just give you a little sense of the impact of our work and how much for a relatively small state agency we are doing our best to be transparent to the residents in New Jersey and to prevent fraud, waste, and abuse and inefficiency in government. And if you go on to the website and touch on one of those dots, it will tell you the nature of the report, the municipality, and then you can find that report on our website as well. This is how to get access to our reports in real time when they are released, and our contact info for the Director of Communications here, Pam Kruger, who, thanks Pam for helping organize this. I'm going to do my best to answer your questions, but if in the event I fail to do so or you want to follow up, would welcome you reaching out to Pam, and here's her email address and how you can sign up for our reports. That's what I'm prepared to share today. Happy to talk more to you now, and welcome the chance to hear from you as well, either through questions or through your comments on what we as a watchdog should be doing. And also welcome to hear your thoughts on how we can meet the interests of the media in sharing this information.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Mr. Walsh. And so the way we'll do this is there's a raise hand feature at the bottom of your Zoom window if you'd like to ask a question out loud. Kimmy, I see you first, so I'll try to get to them in the order that I see them. If you prefer not to come on camera or on mic, you can post your question in the chat, and I'll try to make sure that I put that in the queue. If we get low on questions, I have plenty of questions to fill the air there. But Kimmy, why don't you go ahead? I'm going to spotlight you, and you're unmuted. Go ahead and ask your question.
Okay, thanks. Hi, Mr. Walsh. That was a great presentation. So interesting. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I especially appreciate the part about the nursing homes, right? Because our elderly are so important to us, and it's hard to figure out how to take care of them when they need you know, that kind of accommodation. I would like to know how specifically the issues that you covered today relate to the small business community in New Jersey. Do you have any ideas about that?
Yeah, none of the issues that we discussed on today, I think, focus specifically on small businesses. So I think it probably impacts them in the same way that it would impact, small business owners in the same way it would impact New Jerseyans generally. I uh, so can't think of anything there, Kimmy, other than to say that we welcome tips if small businesses, for instance, think that government is somehow falling down in what it's supposed to do, or if there's fraud, waste, and abuse, which I'm guessing at the local level, sometimes they may find that when they interact with local governments, if they see a way in which there's a problem, those are the things that we like to hear about. We have a hotline to accept those, and the issues we pick up being out and about through these sorts of conversations and through tips we receive, sometimes inform audits that we do where we might be looking at we did an audit, for instance, about a local government that was not disposing of land. It was just sitting on it instead of putting it back on the tax rolls without a plan for what to do with it. Those are the sorts of things that could certainly impact local residents, may impact small businesses. And if there are small businesses that see their local government or state government agency doing something, we'd love it for them to bring it to our attention.
Okay, great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Kimmy. One quick note, I forgot to mention this. When you do come up to ask your question, Kevin, you're next. Introduce yourself, tell us your name and the outlet you represent so the OC can know who they're speaking to. Kevin Coughlin, go ahead.
Kevin, yeah, I'm Kevin Coughlin from Morristown Green out in Morristown. I know that housing authorities deal with the federal government under HUD, but do you have any oversight role over housing authorities?
Yeah, so housing authorities, as I understand it, are creatures of state law that implement federal law, and we have jurisdiction over that. And I don't think it's an area that the office has traditionally. I can't think of a report offhand that addresses housing authorities, but our jurisdiction applies generally to creatures of, to any entity that's within the executive branch of state government, and housing authorities are within the executive branch of state government. So if there are complaints about a housing authority, welcome the chance to hear them.
So would their budgets go to you for review?
We don't review budgets, and that's the word comptroller means different things in different places within government. And so the term comptroller, some understand it to mean something close to the Office of Management and Budget, and where you would oversee the budget, and in some instances, they prepare the budget. We're not that kind of comptroller here. What we do is hold government accountable. We don't decide how government would spend money or review or approve budgets.
But in terms, say, of the hiring of contractors by a housing authority, would you have an oversight role there to see that it was done properly, that they solicited competition and so forth?
Yeah, so from a procurement standpoint, one of our duties is to monitor procurement, and we do that in three ways. One way we do it is by and it's the way that we're most involved and most often involved. If there is a procurement that is over $12.5 million, so think a new building or a whole bunch of roofs or something that is, a very large purchase of buses or a bridge, the $12.5 million, that there's a decent number of contracts that are at that level, but there's certainly more that are below that. But if it's over $12.5 million, any entity in the executive branch, which would include a housing authority, would be required to submit that contract to us for review before it goes out to bid. And we will then review it to make sure they're complying with state law. We would recommend changes if they're not. We would identify areas where they need to, laws that they need to comply with. Sometimes we get contracts that are internally inconsistent, or that comply with laws that are 20 years old, but don't comply with laws that were adopted 5 years ago. And so we have procurement attorneys here who tell those entities, where they need to change it. And we have the ability to prohibit an entity from moving forward with the contract if their contracts are illegal and don't comply with the law.
And would that extend to how they fill like executive positions if they do a search properly?
Just so
that is not a procurement.
Hands raised, Kevin. So we gotta
Okay.
keep it cycling here.
Okay, thanks.
Well, we'll come back to that. Thank you, Kevin. We have 3 folks with their hand raised, Matt, Machine, and Crystal, but we do have a question first from Maria Amato of New Jersey Hispano, who asks about the wave of Medicaid fraud in different modalities for millions of dollars that not only causes the use of large resources to investigate, but also affects the economy and the health system. So what does your office plan to do to reduce or eliminate these cases of fraud?
Yeah, so we spend, we've got a large number of people here. It's probably the area where we've issued the most reports, regularly issue settlement agreements. We audit, we investigate. We have a team that mines data to identify fraud, and we regularly recover, I think, $90 or $100 million a year of fraud, waste, abuse payments that Medicaid made that it should not have made. And we have a tip line as well for those. So it's an area that we're very, very actively engaged in.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. Matt, take it away. Introduce yourself and your outlet. I'll unmute you and then you take it away.
Yes, I'm a reporter with Tap Into Newark. I understand your office had come out with a report a number of years ago about municipal tax abatements and their impacts in part on school districts. Have there been any more recent updates on that? And if we were to look at, the success of those programs, how would we kind of evaluate if they're working?
Yeah, so I'm nice to meet you, Matt. I'm pretty sure that is a report that was issued before I got here. I'm familiar with it, but there's beyond that and what it says in the report. I think it gives that report raises concerns, and I think made recommendations to the legislature on things to consider. Happy to get back to you on that. As I sit here right now, I can't tell you more than I know of the report, and I know it's an important issue, but it's not anything that we've reported on recently.
Thank you.
All righty. Machine, go ahead, introduce yourself, your outlet, and take it away.
Hi, Mr. Walsh. My name is Mohsin Zahir. News and Urdu language newspaper of Pakistani community. So my question is about the migrant crisis. You may aware the situation in New York City, and the situation is like city is upside down and budget is unbalanced. So can you give us some update? What is the situation in New York City and how the state and state agencies are handling this migrant crisis in New Jersey? Do you have any update on this one?
Okay.
Sorry, I had some muting problems there. Sorry about that. You're good.
Yeah, no problem. That is not something that my office is involved with. There are certainly people, the governor's office I know has issued statements on that, and there may be others within government who are involved in that. That is not something that we are involved in, and nothing I can add to that. Sorry.
All good. Okay, next up is Crystal Knapp of Planet Princeton. Crystal, you are good to go.
Hi there. Thanks, Joe. Yes, Crystal Knapp, Planet Princeton, New Jersey Vindicator. And I was wondering what authority your office has over state agencies in terms of whether they're doing their oversight jobs or not. For example, with prisons and jails and solitary confinement, it's clear from the ombudsman's report that people are still the laws being violated about solitary confinement. And then, for example, nursing homes, a nursing home in Princeton shut down abruptly and gave people a few hours notice. And it seems like someone dropped the ball there. At the State Department of Health with how that was handled. Families would consider an abusive situation that they endured with that. Do you have any oversight over those kinds of state issues or not?
Yeah, so nice to see you. I've seen your name 100 times from my prior work, and I've enjoyed your articles and really in-depth coverage on including in the work I used to do on housing. So really good to see you. Sorry, Crystal, I know you asked about the nursing home closure. Your first question was,
I mean, both of them are related in terms of, do you have
state agency oversight?
Yes.
Yeah, so we are, this office oversees all entities within the executive branch of the state government. So that includes big state agencies like the Department of Labor, Department of Community Affairs, any of those big sorts of Department of Human Services, Department of Health. All of the entities that you mentioned are entities that we may either audit, we may investigate for fraud, waste, abuse, inefficiency. We issued a report probably a year and a half ago about the Government Records Council, which is probably an entity that many folks here may have attempted to use. We found that we were critical of their delays and made recommendations for making the process quicker. We were critical of their failure to staff enough to comply with I think a statutory requirement to proceed as expeditiously as possible or something to that effect. So that's a good example, our work on the Economic Development Authority. And then I touched on our work on nursing homes, which were really evaluations of the Department of Health and the Department of Human Services, both entities that are involved with nursing homes. Our work on Medicaid, where we focus a lot of resources and effort and have very broad powers, does include nursing homes that receive Medicaid and welcome complaints about, there are certainly other places within government. You touched on the corrections ombudsperson, where that's a good place if there's corrections issues to file complaints, and there's an advisory board there. They have an expertise there. In nursing homes, there is the corrections ombudsman, who is Laurie Brewer, which is another place within government to submit those sorts of complaints. But we also welcome receiving those, hearing about what's going on. And if it's in the instance of a nursing home that closed, that where things don't look right and government has fallen down, we welcome the chance to hear that.
Awesome. Thank you, Crystal. We got Deb Howlett. We have a question from the chat, but it's Maria's second question. So we'll go to Catherine after that. So Deb, come up, introduce yourself, your organization, and take it away.
Hi, Deb Howlett. I'm actually working on a piece for Crystal at the Jersey Vindicator. I'm also the director of the New Jersey State House News Service, which is an internship apprenticeship program for college students. I wanted to ask you more directly, Kevin, about your position. You were appointed 4 years ago, and you've been serving as an interim for the past 4 years. How does that affect the work you do? And what does it say about the need to have Senate confirmation if it doesn't affect the work you do?
Yeah, the commitment. Nice to meet you, and appreciate the question. The commitment I made to myself, certainly when I started, and when I do the work now, is that I'm doing the work as if I am confirmed. And the reason for that is that's the only way to do it. It is what confirmation gets me that I don't have right now is by law is that I cannot be very easily fired. And so it's something like tenure, and the law says that I'm entitled to a hearing or something to that effect before the governor could discontinue my employment here. And it also gets me the honor of the Judiciary Committee and the full Senate voting on me. And so I'd like to be confirmed, but I'm doing the job the same way, whether I am confirmed or not, because I've always been independent. I believe in, when I was a civil rights advocate, I did work that was unpopular when I fought to get rid of the death penalty in New Jersey. Certainly when we started that was unpopular. The work I'm doing now, I think taxpayers appreciate. I think the overwhelming majority of New Jersey residents appreciate what we're doing. I'm not afraid to anger somebody who is powerful, and if it's the right thing to do. I don't seek that out, but that is a feature of the job sometimes. And it's so in that sense, a little more protection. The law recognizes that, but I'm doing the job the other way. I hope that answers your question.
It does. If I could just follow up, what's the holdup? Do you care to elaborate on?
So there's two senators who have courtesy over me. I was under the impression after speaking and meeting with them that I was going to be confirmed. And then they stopped responding to my phone calls. So I don't know.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
All right. Who do we need to send angry emails to, Mr. Walsh? There we go. Catherine, go ahead. Introduce yourself, your organization, and take it away.
Hi, I'm Catherine Carrera from Chalkbeat Newark. I saw the report on the COVID, misspent COVID dollars out of the ZEP. And I was just curious if your office is following the spending of the various COVID funds on the state level and local level. So many different agencies from school boards to across the board got access to these funds. And I'm just curious if that report came out of a tip or if your office is kind of like following the spending of these funds.
Yep. So nice to meet you, Catherine. And there was someone else as well from Newark. And would just note we issued a report maybe 2 years ago about an ice rink park that the city of Newark improperly procured the construction of. You can check that out if you're interested. It's just a local. Thought you might. There's a law that says that municipalities can get somebody else to pay for a park, and they sort of gave somebody else money when the entity that was building it, which was the Newark Devils, was supposed to be the ones that paid for it because there was no competition for it. So check that out. It's on our website if you're interested. As to COVID money, a few things to note. One is that we're doing an enormous amount of work in reviewing COVID-related contracts that are over $150,000 within the state government. So that doesn't apply to the municipalities and school districts. We are also involved with a program at the state level that touches on a lot of municipalities and especially school districts, in which there are integrity monitors for any contract that at the state level is over $20 million, that they're required to have an independent integrity monitor that we interact with and oversee. And there are reports that are available through our website and through the governor's website that reports on issues that have been found with COVID expenditures. Then the final thing to note on that is that we do have a team that is focused on both educating the public generally within state agencies and more broadly presenting how to prevent fraud, waste, and abuse with the COVID money, but also taking tips through our hotline about areas where there has been problems with expenditures. And one of the big issues with that is so much of what was procured at the local level was done through something, as an emergency. And certainly COVID was at an emergent status for a long time. But when you procure by an emergency exception, it limits competition and sometimes there's a point at which that needs to end. And so good issue for folks to focus on. We welcome tips if there's ways in which the money seems to have been misspent. I hope that, nice to meet you, and I hope that answers your question.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you. All right. I am going to go to the chat again for Maria, since we have Crystal as the second question as well. Maria Mato of New Jersey Hispano wants to know, in Paterson, the prosecutor's office has appointed an interim police chief after reports of police corruption, which could have allegedly been occurring for more than a decade. So she wants to know, is the comptroller's office doing its own investigation on this matter? And if so, what have your researchers and auditors found in Paterson?
Yeah, so we have a practice of just not talking about the work that's ongoing. We talk through our reports. And we don't talk if there's an investigation or audit that's underway, in order to protect the confidentiality of that. We just have a blanket rule of not talking about ongoing work like that. Understood. I'm guessing to a room full of reporters, that is a very, very unsatisfying answer, but that's
although I'm sure it's a very common response they get.
Yeah.
That was actually one of my questions, was what's the process that you interface with local media, both before, during, and after an investigation? That answers at least a third of that question. So if we have time at the end, I have some questions about the relationship between local media, but I want to go to Crystal again here. Crystal, unmute and take it away.
Thanks, Joe. Yep, Mr. Walsh. So I feel like I've been a reporter since 1999. And I feel like I've seen more reports coming out of the comptroller's office since you've been in charge than in my entire tenure as a reporter before that. And so I was just sort of interested in, and I also feel like you're filling a role where, we have a news media ecosystem that's really been struggling. So I feel like your communication of that is sort of taking on this role that the media has not been able to do as well. But anyway, I was just, I guess maybe the question is like, and I know you have a lot of experience from fair share housing and communicating what you're doing, but could you just talk about your communication strategy and what you see, the importance of communicating to the public what you're doing?
Sure. Yeah. So it is, we have a really awesome comms team here. And so I think part of what you're seeing is that I do think we've been fairly prolific, and appreciate that observation. But part of what I think you're seeing is that we're really trying hard to communicate well about what we're doing, because and I think my approach to these things comes when I was the work I did before. I was involved in 350 municipalities, and I understood the importance from seeing change at the local level, and seeing dialogue with effective coverage. And sometimes that's a big daily, but just as often it seemed that was a hyper-local outlet. And I just think I think what we have in common is the creation of dialogue that fuels democracy. And so much of what we do here is trying to share in a neutral and objective way facts that residents of New Jersey should know. And sometimes I'm really disappointed when we put facts out and we make recommendations and it's met with a collective indifference. And so, but that's the way this works sometimes. And my part is to share as much as I can, to get the word out as far and wide as I can, and to be in as many places as possible. And that's why surveys are a really effective way to do that. And then let residents, let lawmakers, let other policymakers decide what they're going to decide. A lot of what we do does lead to change. Some of it doesn't. That's the nature of it.
Thank you. I do want to give Kevin Coughlin another chance to follow up. I apologize for cutting you off earlier, Kevin. We had a lot of questions before, so I want to make sure we got to everybody. Kevin, do you want to come back up and inquire further, or are you good?
Yeah, sure. Real quick. Two quick things. This is the time of year when local governments rehire everybody. Is your agency a place to bring our pay to play questions?
No. Oh,
no. We are your place to bring perhaps pay to play complaints. We are a place where, especially if there are procurements that are in violation of pay-to-play laws, I'd be interested in someone sharing that through our hotline. But short of giving a report, we don't generally provide. There's sometimes where we can share information, or Pam, the director of communications here, can point somebody in the right direction. But in general, we're not, our education of the public is most often through reports, and not through, we're not the entity within government who is responsible for interpreting pay-to-play laws. That is more likely to be the Department of Community Affairs and maybe some of the other entities that have those oversight responsibilities.
And questions about whether laws are followed for hiring, public hirings. Is that something that you would be involved looking at?
We would be involved in it if there's if somebody brings it to our attention that there is a violation, or we are in auditing that entity. And so, but we don't hear, for instance, about all public hirings. That's not our role.
Okay.
We got a question from Oni Evincula, one of the staff here at the center. Oni, I'm going to spotlight you. You go ahead, unmute, introduce yourself, take it away.
Sure. Hi, Kevin. My name is Anthony, and I work with the Center for Corporate Media. My question is, if your office has looked at state and city contractors or subcontractors who pocket tax dollars, taxpayer dollars, instead of paying their employees the wages and benefits required by law. Many of these workers, I believe, who experience wage theft are immigrants, and they're easily robbed and exploited.
Yeah. Hi, Anthony. Thanks for the question. The best place for that is probably either the United States Department of Labor or the New Jersey Department of Labor would be places that are most likely, that are set up to look and to provide redress to that. If there's a violation of law, they can help people get the wages that are paid. They can penalize. We oversee vendors, and so there could be issues here, especially if there is a governmental entity that is not doing what it's supposed to do with the vendors. But if the complaint is between the vendor and the employee, that's not likely to be someplace where we can engage. If the complaint is that there is a municipality or a state agency that has done something wrong, that is more our lane.
Awesome. Thank you. I don't see any more questions in the queue here. So I have one that, as we have 5 minutes left, can you talk a little bit about what you and your office do to foster and maintain good relationships with local and community and ethnic media and journalists across the state? And on top of that, what can those organizations and reporters do to ensure that they're communicating the right way that makes it most likely for you to be able to respond, or that, in a workflow or, access lane that makes the most sense for both parties?
Yeah. So thanks for that. We most often engage after we've issued a report or an advisory or something like that. And we try to really both reach New Jerseyans and engage with the press, in particular by, trying to share information to the extent we can at a level of detail that allows for further engagement, either by the press or by residents. And so one of the reasons why I like to put out lists of municipalities, and you can look at our blogs. One of the things that we've suggested in blogs, in our blog, is like questions to ask your chief financial officer, and ways that you can make sure that your money is protected, because there's probably somebody in government, and it's just sometimes hard to find the right person who is responsible for that. So we've even tried at times in engaging, tried to suggest these are some of the documents that you might want to look at. When I've spoken to the press, certainly, the Oprah request, maybe it's appropriate to ask for this document if you are interested in this issue. And so as much as possible, I like in the work we do to not make it stop with what we do, but rather to have what we do be the beginning of the conversation and then let people, as they choose to do research, and take it the next step. We can't look, for instance, at 564 municipalities, but we can look at 50, and we can then try to equip others to look at the other 500 plus to go further than that. I also welcome hearing from folks about ways we can improve what we're doing, because I don't know beyond that we have a strategy that focuses on the more local press.
That's okay. Thank you. In relation to that, what is the process for your office responding to media inquiries and requests for interviews or comments? I know you are prolific. You're doing a lot of work. You got a lot of stuff going on. And for some of the smaller publications that don't have communications department, it's often 1, 2, 3 people going. They have to find ways to compete for attention with some of the larger outlets, whether it's Advance or, Gannett or whatever. So what is that process like on your end when you get media inquiries and requests for interviews? And then, how might these local news organizations, craft or adjust their strategies for communicating with your office to ensure that, it is received in the best way possible?
Yeah, so we can, I think, two answers to that. To the second question, I would say, Joe, that we can most often discuss things that we have issued a report on, and
Fair.
Things that are in progress, we are not usually able to talk about.
Of course.
Yeah. And having said that, that's a lot of the questions we get, and so sometimes all we can do is say, I can't, our response will be, we have these 3 reports on the topic. That's the best we can do. And sometimes that report might have been issued by a prior comptroller. Yeah, I forget your first part of the question. I'm sorry.
Well, my first question was just like, what is the process on your end for responding? Sorry, I'm getting like phone calls on my work phone here.
I think that the process is for folks to reach out to Pam, who I like to think is one of the more accessible press folks comms folks in state government. And we really welcome the engagement. We can't always respond directly, and sometimes we have to give a no comment, but we really do the best we can, and as much as we can, we point folks to reports and to others within government that might be able to answer.